Oh man, gotta dab my rouge to get my eyeliner set. Um, yeah, I'm a 46-year-old dad who wears eyeliner. I might be 47. I don't remember. Anyway, that's not important. Hi, JP.
Hi, Jeff.
It's a joint with JP. Are we still calling this that? We are.
Sure. Follow your
Yes.
dreams.
Um, yeah, I was laughing with this is a completely random story, but I was laughing with my best friend this week. He used to be we were both extremely evangelical. He specifically came from a denomination called the Primitive Baptists, which when you call yourself in your title primitive, you're really making some statements. But
Hmm.
he was in both of our states, marijuana is now legal. So he was texting me which marijuana I should use to help with my anxiety this week. And I wrote him back. I was like, we have come a long way.
There's been a journey that has been made.
This is a long, we have come a long narrative cycle here for you, the primitive Baptist, to be explaining weed to me. Now in our late 40s. Anyway, how are you doing?
I'm fine. I don't know if I can top that story. I'm just alive.
I have so many stories today. I went to New York yesterday to go
Hmm.
see my daughter's soccer game. It's fantastic. It's a 3.5 hour drive. So we left at 7 a.m. We drove all the way up. Met her for lunch. Amazing taco place in she's at Brooklyn College in Brooklyn. So amazing taco place in Prospect Heights called Taco Maro. I'm just gonna call it out because it was, oh my gosh, it was like the best. It's literally like 4 feet wide and it goes way back. And there was one guy, he was working the counter and he also cooked the food.
Nice.
But it was incredible. It was like the best Mexican food I've ever had. Um, I got the burrito. My son got the quesadilla, and I kept looking over at him asking, "How is it?" And he was like, "This is the greatest thing of my life." I was like, all right, great. So yeah, amazing. And then we walked Prospect Park, and then we like watched her soccer game, which college soccer games are like 2 hours long. There's so long. And then we went to dinner, but the fun part was we had some of her teammates with us. We had to eat quickly. And when you're in Brooklyn, if you pull up a Google map and you're like restaurants near me, there like you get like 200,000 restaurants. And some of them are
Hmm.
like just Joey on the corner with a taco. And then some of them are like this doesn't exist anymore. So it's like impossible. You have to do research before you show up. You just can't be like, I'm gonna find a restaurant. And so we didn't do that. So long story short, we end up well, first we tried to eat at this restaurant in the Hasidic Jewish neighborhood that's next to Brooklyn College, not realizing that it was Yom Kippur. So it was
Hmm.
tough to get through the streets because everybody was walking to temple. So there were
Hmm.
500,000 people walking to temple, and then not really, but that's what it felt like. And then all of the restaurants in that area were closed. Understandably so. So then we tried to go. We just found another random one that was like a mile away. And we went there, and my wife was so hungry. I looked at it and I was like, I think that's a nightclub. I don't think that's a restaurant. And she's like, I don't care. I'm going inside and getting food. And I was like, I'm pretty sure it's a nightclub. It was a nightclub and a hookah bar. So
Ooh.
our like crew of my 10-year-old and my 14-year-old and my 18-year-old and soccer players and my wife and our friend that came with us, we had dinner last night in a hookah bar nightclub that had a fog machine and really loud music. Food was great.
Hmm.
Took them an hour and a half to bring out the food, but it was great.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Hmm.
anyway, that's my fun adventure. Top that one.
No, again, I couldn't have topped the first one, and then you threw that at me. So there's that. Uh, yeah, that's wild. Anyways, what's been happening with me? Well, I did just see you just dying over there.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, my life is weird. It's a weird life. I
Yeah.
was sitting
Yeah, it is a weird life.
in the nightclub. All of the walls were painted black. they were okay. I'm not mentioning the name of the place so I can say this. They had stapled plastic flowers to one of the walls, and you could tell that they had intended to cover the entire wall because they were
Hmm.
kind of in rows. But then about halfway, they just ran out
Yeah, naturally.
and they just stopped the path.
Yeah.
Like they're going like you can tell they're going like top to bottom, and they went all the way, and then all of a sudden, like one row just stops in the middle,
Hmm.
kind of like
Hmm.
3/4 of the way down the wall.
Hmm.
You're like, oh,
Hmm.
you guys just gave up.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
You just
That
quit.
that feels that feels like a vibe. Like you're
Yeah.
just like, I'm totally gonna do this. And then like 10 minutes in, you're like, am I gonna do this? And then when you run out, you're like, I'm done with
I'm
this.
done with this. Yeah,
That's
there were also roses, fake roses stapled to the ceiling. Um, and in like a big bunch. Like, but I'd say like 50 roses. And I imagined that the two people decorating the place, one of them covering the wall and one of them stapling to the ceiling, had a really big fight at the end about I needed those 50 flowers.
yeah.
Anyway, yeah,
You're not gonna get them because they're on the ceiling.
yeah, yeah. There was a fog machine. It was great. Anyway,
Yeah.
it was an experience. My poor 10-year-old, we had just made him sit through, we had made him walk through Prospect Park, which he didn't really want to do. But it was beautiful. It was a gorgeous day. It was really nice. We did take him to the Brooklyn Public Library to read Greek mythology. He's super into Greek mythology right now. We took him to the public library to read Greek mythology. That made him happy. But then, like, the soccer game ended at 7. He's like 2 hours past his dinner time. He's like frustrated. The food's taking an hour and a half to come out. And it was like I had stabbed his heart. And he had ordered meatballs with a side of pasta, thinking he was going to get spaghetti. I thought he was also going to get spaghetti and
He
meatballs.
just
But
got pasta.
the pasta was in a spicy clam sauce,
Oh.
which wasn't explained on the menu. And the meatballs were Swedish meatballs in a spicy barbecue. So it came out, and he was like, we've taught him to be polite. He's trying to be polite. He's trying to be well behaved. They put the plate in front of him, and he's been waiting for an hour and a half. And the look of sheer disappointment on his face.
Hmm.
And I was
As
like, are you okay? And he goes, is this
oh.
really what I have to eat for dinner? And I was
Can
like,
we go back to Taco
yeah.
Mara?
I was like, no, you don't have to eat that. It's okay. We'll box it up. You don't have to eat it. He was like, thank you. I was like, do you want us to get you something else? He's like, I just want to go to bed. I was like, it's
Oh,
like, sorry, buddy. We'll go to bed.
yeah,
Yeah, anyway.
yeah.
Yeah, so
That's
you were about to tell us
that's
your
wild.
adventures.
Oh, sure.
I'm going to keep cutting you off and telling weird aspects of my
Apparently.
story just for my own entertainment.
I mean, so the past few weeks have been just a lot of things. Like I did the Awkward Nerd book fair. Um, I then had to move my partner's mom, so we had to travel up, we had to pack up, and then we had to drive back down and unpack. I had to travel for work. I had to do another book event. Um, I got ill because of the shots that I got. Yay.
Yay.
Keeping current. Um, on top of doing all of this new stuff. So the contracted serial has 2 episodes a week. I'm finishing up Mosswood. I have one chapter
Nice.
left.
Congratulations.
It
Will there be
just
another season?
I think so, but
Okay.
yeah, I think I'm gonna like give that one a break. I have to return to Mandrake Manor at some point. But I want to kind of catch up on the contracted stuff.
Yeah, yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our project and
Well, I've
other
frozen on
projects.
the current. I'm stuck on the current episode.
Oh, well,
Um,
I haven't looked at the previous one, so
the previous one I'm pretty proud of. I bring back
good.
the mop.
Oh,
Um,
as I would expect.
yeah. But one of our characters is in love with a mop, if you haven't heard us talk about nerds in a while. But yeah, I did I'm frozen on the but I was listening to I had 7 hours of music yesterday because we were driving to and from New York. And I heard the song by Chemical Romance Black Parade, which I haven't heard in a while.
Hmm.
And it totally solved the plot the
Perfect.
scene thing I was thinking. It's
We'll
like,
have to give
oh,
them props.
if I put this scene to the tune of Black Parade, it totally works. Yeah. So
Perfect.
that's what I'm gonna do tonight, probably. Tonight or tomorrow.
Perfect.
Anyway.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, but you're like saying these events really quickly. You're doing really well at
mhm.
these events. You're selling books.
Yeah, yeah,
People are Instagramming the books you sell and being like, "Oh my
yeah,
gosh, I love this book." Yeah.
yeah.
You're doing good things, man.
So I recovered Mandrake Manor. It's been a year since it was out, and I got a new cover for it. And at the Awkward Nerd Book Fest, I had ordered 15, thinking that that was enough, and sold out and had like an hour or two left of the event. And I was like, I'm out of these. That's weird. And then at the next event, which was the Boozy Book Fair, I had sold an additional like 17 or something. So,
Nice.
yeah. So, like, one person came to that event, was like, I saw an image of this one and someone posted about it. So I'm just buying this. And I'm like, did they even read the back of it? And I'm like, I don't care. Not
Yeah,
my problem.
great. Do you want five? You can buy five of them.
Yeah. You could have five of them if
Yeah,
you wanted.
that's
So,
awesome.
yeah. So it's interesting to see how covers really do make the difference. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I love your new cover, by the way. It's very creative. Did you
Thanks.
do it yourself or did
Thanks.
you buy it?
No, I got it on ever after cover design. I
Okay.
was stalking around, found an author who had something kind of similar-ish, and I wanted their vibe, so I used that. I'm going to use them again from Mosswood, so
Nice.
yeah.
That's great. I've
Yeah.
never heard of them before. Oh, fun. They did Mile High. I read Mile High.
Yeah.
Um, nice. It's a romance book about hockey. Um, very cool. Okay, are we ready to talk about our book?
Sure.
So I brought the book this week, and I'm very excited. I brought The Dip by Seth Godin.
Ooh.
And anybody right
Ooh.
now that's listening, that's like, he said Seth Godin, I'm turning it off. Stop it. This is worth listening to, specifically for authors in our day and age. It's so
Hmm.
don't turn it off because I said Seth Godin. I know there's some of
Yeah,
you
I
out there
can't
that are
leave.
like,
You can't leave.
that's right. JP has to stay. Have you
Hmm.
read The Dip?
I have not. I have heard about it from our
Yeah.
mutual Jay Thorne, but
Yeah. Jay Thorne and I are both Godin heads. He's more a Godin head than I am. He's actually met Godin and like spent time with him, but I am a Godin head from afar. Okay. The book was written in 2007, but it is still I think super important for author mindset, and I think it's a
hmm.
the reason I'm bringing it is because we're all going into conference season, or we're in the middle of conference season. Everybody seems to be going to
Hmm.
writers conferences. I'm going to the Maryland Writers Association conference this weekend, which I'm
Ooh,
very
nice.
excited about. I think it's the first in-person writers conference I've attended where I wasn't a speaker. I've only attended one other, held by Jay Thorne, as previously noted, and I've been to one writer workshop in my life that was held by Joe Bunting, another good friend. But so I've done those two. Like, it was a writer retreat. It was like a weekend thing. Um, we all stayed in the same house. It was fun. His wife introduced me to pickled onions, which, I mean, come on. But those are the only two like big author events I've done. So this is the first author event I've ever gone to just in attendance. And I'm very excited about it. I've done the nerd thing. I've researched all the speakers. I know
Hmm.
like their pets' names and they're like I've picked out all my
Great,
like
great.
yeah.
Didn't you have a conversation about this with somebody
I did.
in
I
a
did.
podcast?
I did.
Hmm.
Lindsay, I
Okay,
did. And
just
she told me
making
not
sure.
to do that but I did
Hmm.
it anyway. And I
Okay,
am
cool,
gonna
cool,
be
cool,
weird. I am gonna run up
cool,
to
cool, cool,
people
cool,
and be
cool.
like, "Oh
Great,
my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh." And
great.
yeah,
So
it's
you
gonna
didn't listen,
no. Oh, well, I mean, I
okay,
heard what she said.
but you didn't listen.
I
Those are two very different things.
look, there's listening and then there's application. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, no, I'm sure, I'm just testing it out. We'll see how it goes. I'm totally not gonna freak out on people like I used to in church conferences.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. Um, next time we get together, I'll be like, okay, so I got punched at the Maryland Writers Association.
Hmm. Hmm.
So anyway, I'm never going back to a writers conference again. Oh my gosh. I gotta JP, I have to focus. We're talking about the dip. I don't even know how we
We
got
are talking about the dip.
we're talking about the dip because like this is the I feel like this is the season when we all start to question what in the hell are we doing? And we hear all of these strategies, we hear all of these like this is how you should do this, this is what you have to do, and we're all like, "Oh my gosh, I either overwhelmed or I am now going to conquer the world with this new strategy." And The Dip is a mindset book that I think will serve all of us very well. So that's why I picked it. It is super short. The ebook is an hour and a half long. I'm sorry, the audiobook
Hmm.
is an hour and a half long. You can literally listen to it. It's a tiny book. It's actually a series of blog posts that he wrote that he then put into a book. I was personally impacted by the Dip in, ooh, it was like 2 years before I started the Dialogue Doctor. So it must have been like 5 or 6 years ago. It may have been 3 years before I started the Dialogue Doctor. I had given up on my first series. I had written some short story collections, and I had written two novellas. And I was like selling nothing
Hmm.
and was failing to write to market, which back then the advice, which I feel like it still is, but I'm not talking about that today, was the only way to sell books is to write to market, write fast, publish, repeat, Amazon ads, all that stuff. They're like, that's the only way to sell books. And I was incapable of doing that for multiple reasons that we don't need to psychoanalyze me for. Now, I was incapable of doing that, but I was also very sad and angry at myself. I had a series of people that helped me. And I've talked on the podcast before about how Mark Leslie Lefebvre seriously bailed me out. And I've talked about how Jay Thorne told me to start the Dialogue Doctor and to stop farting, like start helping people and it'll actually fix yourself, which is he was right. Everybody should listen to what Jay says. So,
Thanks, Jaythorn.
but there's a step before I went to those guys. And the step
Hmm.
before I went to Mark Leslie and Jay was I emailed Seth Godin because
Ooh.
a little known fact about Seth Godin is that his email is on his blog and
Hmm.
he answers every email, every single one. And he gets millions. Now, this was like 7 years ago. He has gotten older. My understanding is he's in semi-retirement right now. He may not answer every email anymore, but back then he answered every email. So I sat down and poured my heart out in this like probably 30-page essay to him about
Hmm.
writing fiction and how sad it is and how hard it is and how I'm not selling any books and this is terrible and feeding my children and oh my gosh,
Yeah.
everything's terrible. And he wrote me back two sentences. That sounds hard, period. Read the Dip, period. Seth. And
That
I was
sounds
like,
like trauma dumping. Read the
yeah,
dip.
read the Dip. I was like, oh, read the Dip. So I read the Dip and it totally fixed my mindset. It's what got me to go talk to Mark Leslie and to Jay and to finally like become the stunning example of chaos that I am today. So, um, so the Dip starts off with a question, which is, how do you feel about quitting?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking you, how do you feel about quitting?
Quitting what?
Just in general as a practice. Are you a quitter? Do you quit a lot of things? Does the word quitter have negative connotations for you?
Uh, no.
Wow,
No, it
that's
doesn't
great.
have negative connotations,
Okay, fantastic.
except when it comes into play with things I am passionate about, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So,
the
like, if you
problem
were
is you're
like,
too
how do you
healthy
feel
for the
about,
Dip. I need a
great.
co-host here that's like as neurotic as I am. And then you'll be like,
Well,
quitting is evil. I'm just kidding.
quitting's the worst. Well, so one of the things though was like, and I've told this story before, like I had to say that I didn't want to write and I didn't want to like do art out loud to a group of people because of a th practice or a thing that we were saying we didn't have time for. And then I had to say I don't want to instead. And that pissed me off so much that I was like, I refuse this notion. And instead I just got angry at corporate world. So when it comes to like
Which is
that
appropriate.
side of quitting,
Yeah.
thumbs up. When it comes
Okay.
to quitting my stuff, no, I'm
Okay.
angry about it.
I like that.
So I still have neuroses.
You already understand the Dip though. So maybe not. We'll see. Um, Godin's thing is that culture has a negative stereotype about quitting, that being a
Hmm.
quitter is generally seen as a negative thing. But his phrase is winners quit all the time. They just know the right stuff and the right time to quit. So the purpose of the dip is to help you shift your mindset to he has a series of books that I would say are all about becoming the best in the world at something. And
Hmm.
this is the first one of those. I would say the next one is Tribes, where he talks about how marketing actually works. The Purple Cow is another one where he talks about marketing actually works. But this is kind of like, I would say this is his prequel to all of his other work about like what your mindset needs to be coming in. So he wants you to quit. Um, but he wants you to quit the right things at the right time. And he says that's winners quit. That's his like key phrase. So in the book, he's going to give there's two facts. Again, it's a short book. There's two facts about culture. And then there's three types of curves we're going to talk about. And then what quitting is in each of those types of curves, when you should quit and how you should quit, depending on what shape you're in at the moment. So that's the journal overview. Any thoughts about quitting before we move on to the two fun facts about culture? Anything else to add about quitting? Have you quit something recently?
No.
Okay. Have you quit
I
something you
hold on to too
wish?
many things. I'm well aware of that.
Have you quit something you wish you hadn't have quit?
No.
Okay. All right. You're no
Yeah.
fun on this. All right. Fine. It's fine.
I
Um,
mean, I have a weird mindset. Like, if I let it go, I let it go. Like, what are
okay.
you gonna
Yeah.
do about it? You gotta just pick the next thing, right?
That's really funny.
I'm too
Um,
happy. I could pretend I have quit things I have been so upset about.
thank you. I appreciate that. Um, it's the most nine on the Enneagram I've ever talked to. Um, and I say that with spite, not with love. Just kidding. Okay. So,
Okay.
uh, so, um, two facts about culture. The first fact he says is that culture rewards being the best. And the rewards for being number one in something are 1,000 times greater than the rewards for being number 10.
Hmm.
And we kind of see this, like I think something all authors are familiar with is the Amazon algorithm. If you're
Hmm.
number one, you're getting a massive amount of benefit. If you're at the top of the search page, you're getting so much more benefit than if you're on number 10 for the search page. So if somebody searches, um, you know, cozy romance in an apothecary, and if
Am I gonna
Mosswood
look that up right now?
Apothecary is number
I'm gonna look that
one,
up right now.
you're getting a huge benefit from that search. Whereas if you're number 10 in that search, you're not even being seen. Does that make sense? And so
Hmm.
the reason Godin says that that impact exists is because as consumers, we're faced with. Did you come out at number one?
No,
Oh, what's number one for that search phrase?
I don't know. This is like, what is this? I don't know. It's not mine. I'm not gonna give free promo.
Are there other cozy romances being written in an apothecary?
I don't know.
This is
Yes.
my favorite. I have so many thoughts about the market right now. Anyway, um, I didn't mean to induce trauma with my weird
No, it's fine.
example.
I'm not upset. I am on second for a different one though, so that's fine.
That's nice. Okay, that's good. Um, yeah, so the reason that this exists is that the number one gets 1,000 times the benefits of being number 10, even though the distance in quality between number one and number 10 is probably very small. The reason that it gets those choices is because consumers in our day are faced with infinite choices. There's no end to, evidently, there's multiple cozy romances in an
Yep.
apothecary.
It's fine. I'm not
There's
upset about it.
there's no end to choices. So most people wait for the recommendation of others. They
Hmm.
want to see something take off before they grab onto it. And this is like Godin doesn't talk about it in the dip, he talks about it in other places, but this is the bell curve of sales. You have your early adopters. If you picture like, your vertical axis is like number of people buying into something, and the horizontal axis is time. You have your early adopters up front. There's few of them, so the curve is like low on the scale. And then as time goes on and more early adopters get into it, finally you get to like the meat of the bell curve, which is the most people buy into, after people have recommended it. And then you get like a lagger effect of like there are some
Hmm.
people that like still haven't read Harry Potter. So like there's that like, you know, bell curve shape. And he said this is it, this is when we say the market operates in a bell curve, that's what we're talking about, is that people are faced with infinite choices, so they wait until something they know something's going to be good or recommended, and they buy it. Now, marketing is a way to escalate that bell curve, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. But if you think about like what shows get watched on Netflix, if Netflix tells you they're in the top 10, even though they've never been seen. So like a lot of times a show will come out and Netflix will put it in its top 10 right away. It's a
Like
way for
chaos.
like chaos, like the perfect show
Like the
that
perfect
never
show that
should have
got
been canceled.
canceled.
Yeah,
Hmm.
chaos.
Yeah.
It Netflix put it in the top 10 even though nobody had even watched it. So the bell curve, it escalates the bell curve. The bell curve's like, oh, Netflix is recommending it, so it must be good. And it's got Jeff
Yep.
Goldblum, so how could it be bad?
And
Um,
it was great.
so so like there are ways to fast forward the bell curve. That doesn't mean the bell curve doesn't exist. It still exists. You're just kind of skipping over the early adopters by using power to the power of a platform, like move past that. So that's what Amazon ads are, all that thing. So that's his first facts about culture. Being number one is 1,000 times better than being number 10. Any like pushback or thoughts or anywhere you've seen that illustrated in your life?
What a weird last question. I don't know about that one.
Like
Um,
when you Google like cozy romance apothecary.
yeah, yeah. I
Or,
mean, when it comes to
I'm sorry, I'm just poking
search
at you. I
terms,
apologize.
it's fine. I'm not upset about it. When it comes to search terms, I agree. When it comes to categories, I don't agree, if that makes sense. And I think that there's a clear distinction of that because I think that writers will use categories more than readers do, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, and he'll like we'll get into like the niching down. Remember, this book was written in 2007, which
Hmm.
is at least 5 years before the ebook.
Yeah.
So he's writing this book. I feel like part of what makes Godin great is he writes books about the future.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
he's not studying the book industry necessarily. He's like, this is how industries work. And so
Yeah.
he's already seen this. One of the illustrations he uses a lot is Netflix mailing out DVDs
Hmm.
because he's writing this book before streaming exists. So he's like, and I have to remind myself when I'm reading it, I'm like, that's right. This book was written before you could stream video online. Like
Yeah.
it's just a, so
Yeah. And that's not to say like what I was talking about with categories isn't like doesn't account for that. I think that
I lost JP.
that's
JP.
just a clear distinction that I like to make because honestly, I think that why did you freeze?
You
Can you hear me?
froze. You froze, not me. You
You
froze.
froze.
You
You
froze.
froze.
I have the recording. You froze.
That's
You
what
were saying,
happens, buddy.
as you were
That's what
saying,
happens.
I'm not editing this either.
Um, I don't know where I was at. So what I will say is, I think
You
that
were
categories
caveating
are,
your category statements.
yeah, yeah. I think that categories are just a thing that authors use, and it's a good way. It's a good publicity thing to say that you're number one in a category as long as it's tangential to yours. But that's not really meeting the reader at how I think readers search for or look for books. I think they are using the search term, the search bar. So that's not to say what Seth Godin is saying with the
No,
10.
no, yeah.
It's just meeting them in the search bar as opposed to meeting them in the categories.
Yeah, and I think you're actually affirming what Godin's saying is that like you recognize that like yeah, being number one in the search bar is
Hmm.
super, super more important than being the second cozy romance in an apothecary in the search
Yeah,
bar.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Hmm. It's
so
true.
I like that I can see the screen come up on your glasses again
Hmm.
because you're going back to look at it.
I'm
Anyway,
looking right at it.
yeah. So yeah. Oh my gosh, this is the shortest book in the world. It's going to take us 3 hours because I can't stop
Hmm.
poking at you. Okay,
Hmm.
so that's you're like, I don't know why you keep partnering with me in things. I'm a jerk.
Oh no, my
Um,
internet's unstable.
oh, JP's gone. Yeah, so that's his first fact about culture. His second fact about culture is there isn't one market. There
Hmm.
isn't one best in the world of anything. There are a million gazillion micro markets. So he says when he's talking about through the rest of this book that you need to be the best in the world, he's not saying you need to be the best real estate agent in the world. He's saying you need to be the best real estate agent that sells family homes in Hunt Valley, Maryland. You need to be the best in the world at that niche. And so he's challenging our understanding of what does it mean to be the best in the world. You don't need the best thriller author in the world. You need to be the best thriller author who does live in-person events in Rockford, Illinois. Right? Like that's kind of his like niche down.
Let's see about that.
um yeah. So I think that goes into what you're saying about categories that like we use categories to like talk to the algorithm.
Hmm.
And we try to use categories to like market our niche to be like, oh my gosh,
Hmm.
I'm the best Bigfoot romance writer. But that's not actually what readers care about. Readers are just like, I just need to know that you're the best in the world at something, and then I will be willing to check you out. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? And
Yeah.
mostly, and word of mouth will always trump, will always beat marketing, like paid marketing.
Hmm.
It's a weird thing,
Yeah.
but like people will trust their friends and what their friends say more than your ad, which is a
Yeah.
weird, yeah. Oh,
Which,
oh yeah,
I mean, like you can see that at book fair events, especially if you end up at one that's really popular. Like I had person who was with a friend who was like, "Oh, this book looks really interesting," and then their friend also bought it because their friend saw that their friend wanted it, and so they're like, "Well, we're gonna read this together." And I'm like, "Yeah, please, by all
yeah.
means. You
Do
want to
you
buy the
have
rest
more
of them?"
friends? Yeah, more friends. Can you call family to come and join this newly burgeoning book club that I wholly endorse?
Yeah,
Um,
I will not visit your house, but you can call between these hours.
I will sit on your porch while you read to be
Nope.
available to answer questions.
I will take phone calls between these hours.
Um, Yeah, so those are kind of the setting that he has in the as we move into his conversation about quitting and how you become the best in the world at something. Those are kind of his things. We're becoming the best in the world in a niche, not in the whole world.
Yeah.
And we need to understand that becoming the best in the world is super important because number 10 doesn't ever even get looked at. Number one
Hmm.
is the one that people look for. Okay, so he's got three types of curves: the dip, the cul-de-sac, and the cliff. And he said all business ventures fall into these three. Every business falls into these three. And again, we've got success on the vertical axis and time on the horizontal axis. So the dip is a U shape. It starts off successful, and then there's a drop, and it stops being successful, sometimes for a long time, for what he calls the long slog, which we'll get into. And then at some point, it becomes successful again. It starts to take off. And he says almost all businesses will match this curve given enough time.
I'm surprised I don't have a whiteboard, but
I
hmm.
didn't pull up a whiteboard on purpose because I'm trying to
Hmm.
be, I will. You're right.
No, no, it's
You're right. Now
fine.
we should do a whiteboard.
Visualize it.
We should do a whiteboard. You're so right.
Mhm.
Um,
You're welcome, everyone.
you have to promise not to draw on it again. like you did in our last meeting when I
I've
used the
literally
whiteboard.
never drawn on this.
Were you not the one
Now I'm
drawing
going
on it?
to.
I thought you
No,
were
I
the
didn't
one
draw
drawing
on
on
it.
it.
No, I
I
didn't
could have
even know I could draw
sworn
on it. I'm not
somebody, did you see that though? We were in a dialogue
No.
doctor meeting and I was drawing on the whiteboard and then somebody started just making weird lines on it. And I was like, stop drawing on my whiteboard.
Oh yeah, no, that wasn't me. I just thought you were being weird.
No, I wasn't being weird. Um, somebody was drawing on my whiteboard. I was like, cut it out. I'm trying to illustrate something with a very inaccurate pen. Okay, can you see my whiteboard? You
I
can.
absolutely can see your whiteboard.
Okay. So this is what the dip looks like. The dip looks like
Hmm.
this. This middle section might be is in indiscriminate length. Could be longer, could be
Hmm.
shorter. We'll talk about that. So Godin says, so what happens is at the start of something, you have a lot of success when you first start. It's very exciting. All of your friends and family, and I'm just going to keep using books because that's the world we're in. All of your friends and family buy your first novel. They're like, oh my gosh, you wrote a novel. This is great. We will buy it. This is awesome. But then as you continue to write novels, less and less people buy them. And you finally get into this place where you're like struggling to figure out what in the hell you're doing. Now, Godin says, given enough time, you will start to rise again and figure it out. Given enough time. That, like,
Hmm.
if you're not in a cul-de-sac or a cliff, which we'll talk about in a second. But given enough time, and if you do the right things, which we'll also get into, to create a dip and not a cul-de-sac, you will start to rise again. He's like, people who continue to work at something somehow find success. But he says the reason that this curve exists is because society likes this curve. For one thing, this curve weeds a lot of people out.
Hmm.
People start, they feel great when they start. It gets hard, so they quit. And so this is surviving this curve is how you become the best in the world. This
Hmm.
curve thins the herd, Godin says. I totally saw that. I had 3 months in which I worked in a real estate office, 3 months. And I was working to help them set something up. I wasn't like a real estate agent, but they were one of the things they were setting up was a real estate school to like help people get their real estate agent license, or they were thinking about it. I don't think they ever actually did it, but we like strategized out how it could happen. It's not important. And what I learned from them was that at the time, this is, 9 years ago, at the time, because God, I'm old. At the time, real estate agents had a 3 year shelf life. You got it took a year to get your license in our state. You studied. You got your license. You were super excited. You're going to make $1 million. You sold houses to all of the friends and family you knew, and maybe the second line of friends and family, or as Godin would say in his other book, the tribe that you're a part of. But then getting into other people's tribes is really hard. It requires a lot of legwork, and you get this quickly diminishing result. You sold to everybody you know. Now you're in a diminishing result, and you actually have to like bust your butt to make this business work. Now, there are real estate agents that bust their butt. They make it work. They're a real estate agent for 20 years, and some of them become extremely wealthy because they just keep working at it until it works. 90% of them quit after 3 years. They keep their
Hmm.
agency license. They sell all the houses that they can sell easily. It gets hard. They quit and they move on to something else. And Godin says society has set up these dips because it helps us understand who the best in the world is, making
Hmm.
it hard to become the best in the world. So he uses examples like becoming a doctor. So, and I get this one hit me personally, which is why I'm going to use it. My son right now is trying to get into med school. He had to go to college and he had to like study really hard and get all the courses. And there's required courses he had to take. Some of the required courses he will never, ever, ever use as a doctor. He will never likely use analytical chemistry as a pediatrician.
Chemistry.
What is that?
I hated analytical chemistry.
Yeah, and he's never going to use it. Why does he have to take it? Because it's part of what we say you have to do or deal,
Hmm.
the hurdle
Hmm.
you have to jump through to be a doctor. We need to know that you can pass analytical chemistry. He had to take US government. Why does he have to take US government? Because it's a hurdle you have to jump through to get good grades to become a doctor. Then he had to take the MCAT. What does the MCAT tell you about his ability to be a doctor? Not much. It tells you that he can study for a test and that he can take that really stressful 7 hour long test. But it
Hmm.
doesn't tell you much about whether he's going to be a good surgeon or not. But it's just a hurdle that we've set up. And then he had to send in med school applications, and they're very detailed as to what they have to be. Why? Do those details like help him become a better, if he can like fill in the right forms, does that make him a better doctor? Not really, but it's just a hurdle that we've set up. And then there's the essays, and then there's the in-person interviews. And then finally, if he can last through all of those hurdles, he can then go to med school to become a doctor. So there's a series of hurdles, Godin says, in every industry, either intentionally set up or unintentionally set up, that you have to jump through to prove to the majority of people that you are a master.
Yeah.
You might be a master at the start of the dip. You still have to go through all of those hurdles in order to prove to society that you are a master at what you do. And Godin says this is why the dip exists, because we require people to jump through sometimes purposeful, sometimes very meaningless hoops to prove that they are a master so that they can so that then the bell curve of buyers can be like, oh, that guy has risen to number one in this niche, or that girl or that person has risen to number one in this niche. I can now trust that their book is number one.
Hmm.
Any thoughts on the dip?
I think relating it back to like author writing business, I mean, the what is it? Like most small businesses don't last, what is it, 3 or 5 years? One of the two,
Most small
whichever.
businesses end after 3 years. Yeah.
3 years. Yeah. And I mean, part of that is like financial stuff, but it still falls within the same realm because we put a lot of time and effort into the works that we publish. And then when we first publish them, it's our close bubble that we're trying to get them to get the books, to share the books to their audiences, to basically get enough reviews so that when the person that doesn't know us sees the book and sees that it has a certain number of reviews, they have a proof of concept to then buy it and then ideally leave a review and then just more and more build and build. But that is such a huge hurdle to get over. And some people get stuck with like 10 reviews or less for years on a book. And that is not necessarily the measurement of success, but unfortunately that is a big hurdle to leap over for that book to gain traction and attention.
Yeah. And I think like you're describing, like he's describing, there's all these things we jump through, all these barriers we go through that actually has nothing to do with being a master writer, right?
Right.
Like being able to find the right cover, mastering Amazon ads, understanding book talk, understanding
Yep.
Facebook. None of these things have anything to do with being the best horror writer in, Canada. None of these have
But
anything to do with that.
that's why people go trad though, because
But even trad, you got to master how to pitch.
now you do, yeah.
You got to master how to sit down with an agent and pitch yourself in 10 minutes. You got to master the first page because they always
Hmm.
ask like, "Oh, let me see your first page." That first page has to be kick-ass, even though that the kick-ass first page you give them will probably change by the time the
Hmm.
book is published. You have to master the pitch of that first page. You then have to master the long sell because you then have to send them the book. You then have to stay in contact with them. You have to keep things moving and going. Like there's query letters is another one of those weird hurdles that has nothing to do with how good a writer you are.
Right. Right.
But,
Right.
and you can be amazing at writing query letters and write a crappy book. It's
Yeah.
like they're not related. So,
They are not.
Anyway, all that to say, I get it. Like I fully buy in on his, and I don't, he's not angry about it. He's not like, oh, there's these unnecessary hurdles and we should all be angry at how the world works. That's not his play. He's like, no, no, just know that this exists. This is a
Yeah.
thing that is real.
So what do we do when we recognize that it happens?
We have to talk about the other two curves first. So
Damn it, Jeff.
the second curve is called um the again success and time. The second curve is called the cul-de-sac. And for those who are international listeners that don't know, I'm actually not going to draw that because it's going to look inappropriate. Thank
Mm-hmm,
you for
mm-hmm,
saving me from
mm-hmm,
that. Um,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
a cul-de-sac is a dead end street.
mm-hmm.
So like when I grew up, cul-de-sacs where the fancy people lived, it's like a street that has like a circle at the end. And so a cul-de-sac is this dead end street where you can, you have to turn around in the circle to come out. All the houses are in the circle. So Godin is like cul-de-sacs are industries that aren't going anywhere. And there is no positive growth to the curve. And there's usually not big excitement at the start either. There might be a little bit of excitement. Whoa, that's a weird pen. What happened there? There might be a man. See, this is why I can't open whiteboards because I
Apparently.
comment on them. There might be a little bit of excitement at the beginning, but mostly it just looks like this. And it's going to look like this in
Okay,
infinity.
so it's just a slow decrease to infinity
Yeah.
for
And
those
it may
that
not be
can't
a
see.
decrease. It may just be like it's just a straight line. If I could draw a straight line with a mouse, it would just be a straight line.
Well, there is the line tool.
You know what? You and your tools. So, but this is what he calls the cul-de-sac. And it is mediocrity that will never change, is what he calls it. There's no way to be the best in the world because, oh, there's a straight line. Good job, GP. There's no way to be the best in the world because it's always going to be mediocre. It's never going to change. It's just, it is what it is all the time. So that's the cul-de-sac. Now, I will give you a hint. Being in a dip or a cul-de-sac has a little bit to do with your own mindset.
Hmm.
And so the cul-de-sac is kind of a false flag in the book, but
Mm-hmm.
he points it out when we get to quitting in a minute. It's important. He says, when he compares the dip and the cul-de-sac, he says most of us like the cul-de-sac because we're very comfortable there. We understand what it is. It's not scary. We don't have to worry. We don't have to continuously ask the question, will I be the best in the world? Because you just are where you are. Does that make sense?
So
It's a place of comfort.
would you say like an author that puts out 1 to 2 books a year, but has the expectation that that will always make the same amount of money, no increase, no decrease, it's always like the same? Or what?
In author world, I would say the cul-de-sac is you've gotten into putting out let's use the 1 to 2 books a year, but it doesn't even have to be that. Let's say let's do the like write fast, publish, repeat. You put out a book a month and
Hmm.
your book a month kind of hits your email list and it never rises to number one. It's never the best at anything. It just kind of lives in the middle. And
Hmm.
you make some money off of it every time it does it. It has some rewards. It's never going to replace your day job. It's never going to be the great thing you want, but it hangs in there. And the thing about the cul-de-sac is it gives you just enough to be like, it's fine.
Right.
Right? It's
But I
fine.
mean, couldn't you then say like someone who has reached the income that they're comfortable with, wouldn't that then be a cul-de-sac if they,
Yeah, if they want it to be.
yeah.
Now, Godin would
Okay.
challenge you that like cul-de-sacs don't necessarily last, you burn out.
Hmm.
Because
Okay.
there's no growth, there's no adventure, there's no excitement. You're just doing the same thing over and over again for the rest of the time. There's no hopes, there's no dreams. This is where we live. We just are
Well,
going
that's a little dismal.
we're just going in circles in this cul-de-sac for the rest of time. Right. And
It's a little dark.
it's not going to get any better. It's not going to get worse rapidly. It's safe. And part of what he says is the danger of the cul-de-sac is that it's safe, is that You feel safe there. So you become okay with being average. And that's the cul-de-sac. Yeah. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
It does. I don't agree with the doom and gloom, but I get it.
Wait, let me give you more doom and gloom. Maybe I can convince you.
Well,
I
the
don't
cliff is
necessarily.
probably terrible.
So for me, where I do disagree with Godin is I'm like, look, if you're happy in the cul-de-sac, be in the cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
That's great. I
Yeah.
don't like that's fine. If this is what you like to do and you love it and you have a good time like putting out a book a month and you know
Hmm.
that there's like a slow diminishing return because there always is. If you're not finding ways to get new people, there's always a like slow runoff. That's fine. That's great. Like I'm not judging you. Godin's thing is though, if you hope to be more, you have to get out of the cul-de-sac.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, like, even if you do have that like comfort mindset, which I think is a great mindset to have, which is why I argue against the doom and gloom, there
Mhm.
should be cognizance about an ever-changing market because you run the risk of starting to use old methods that fail to work.
Yeah, and that's Godin says cul-de-sacs do inevitably run away, like run off and die.
Hmm.
You burn out or the cul
Excuse me. Run off and die?
run off and die.
Calm down.
Either you burn out or the cul-de-sac. I told you I'm tripling down on the doom and gloom to make my point. Either you burn out or the cul-de-sac, like the people, the market dies out because the markets are ever changing. So if you
Hmm.
just keep doing the same thing forever, I remember when I lived downtown in Baltimore, like we walked everywhere, and there was only when I first moved there was only one hardware store within walking distance.
Hmm.
And so if you wanted to get like a new hammer, you had to go to this hardware store. The same guy had owned it since the 50s. And it operated in this weird way where he didn't want you walking through his store. So you opened the door and his desk was right there. And you literally couldn't get around it. He built a little fort and you couldn't get around his desk. And you would have to tell him what you want. And then he would go find it and be like, "Is this it?" And you'd be like, "No." And he'd be like, "All right, well then tell me what it is." And I'd have to bring in pictures. I'd be like, "I want this." So
That
because
sounds
I don't
horrible.
speak the hard. It was horrible in the 50s when the neighborhood had a fourth the people it did when I lived there. It was probably a great way to operate. But this guy was in a cul-de-sac. He'd been doing the same thing forever. And he wasn't going to change. And there was always like a weird, like 3 to 4 angry people sitting at the door waiting for this guy to go find whatever wrench or hammer they were trying to buy because he's the only game in town. Now, 2 years moving there, an Ace Hardware opened down the street.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, I ain't got to go to Weird Store anymore because I wasn't going to Weird Store because I wasn't living in that cul-de-sac because I liked it. I was living in that cul-de-sac because I didn't have another choice. But as soon as I had
Right.
another choice, I stopped going there. And sure enough, like a year and a half later, he closed. And so that's what Godin, I think that would be an illustration of like what it means to live in the cul-de-sac. You just keep doing what you're doing, not thinking about change, just living in the like I've reached a comfortable average and I'm just going to live in that comfortable average until it dies. Does that make sense?
It
Or
does.
when I was coaching churches, I worked with a pastor one time who the church had been slowly dying over a 20-year period. Every year they had a couple less members than they did the year before. Maybe the members died. They'd get new families in, but then old families would drift out. But overall, they were a slowly dying organization. And
Yeah.
after working with them for a couple years, I finally had a heart to heart with them, and I was like, "Hey," because the congregation wanted to change. They wanted something new, but they were living in this cul-de-sac, according to Godin's thing. I asked the pastor, I was like, what are we doing here? Like, they want to change. You don't want to change what's happening. And he very honestly, and I think courageously confessed to me, he was like, I just kind of thought the church would continue to die until I retired. And then I'd be the last person here and I'd close the doors. And that's the cul-de-sac mindset. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. It'll hang out. Does that make sense?
Yes, ish.
Okay.
It does. I
Let me
have
give you a third
contentions.
illustration. No,
Um,
give
I
me
have
contingents.
contentions. No, so I think that the cul-de-sac exists in two phases, and I think that um, from how I'm understanding this and from when this was written, this feels very like productivity mindset focused.
It is, yes.
Um, and I think that there is a problem with that, uh, because it neglects the fact that also doing all of the work to try and exponentially increase your revenue is also going to get you burnt out. And it sort of ignores the factor that like you cannot work yourself to death. Um, and so I think that the cul-de-sac exists as two phases. There's the constant decrease, and it's a minutia decrease until we reach a point where we are at negative success or at a 0 point. Then
Yes.
there is the flat line, which if you zoom in and you keep zooming in, you may see these waves, and these waves would indicate moments where there are tiny pivots and tiny changes that retain our constant flow of average but happy. And I think that there should be two existences of this cul-de-sac. One that is cognizant of the changes, but is capable of making the right pivots to retain in a
Mhm.
comfort average.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
There is kind of, and what I hear what you're saying, I actually agree. I agree with you. Not actually agree with you. It's so surprising. I agree with you.
What?
There's nothing. I'm examining my own language as I talk, which I need to stop doing. I agree with you. There is a hyper capitalism to kind of Godin's mind thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, one of my critiques as you and I talk about this, I think you're right. I think that hyper capitalism says growth or death. And I
Yeah.
hear what you're saying that like it doesn't have to be that way. You
No.
can,
No.
it's okay to be like, I've found a comfortable place. I'm just going
Yeah.
to stay there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a comfort income level. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna burn out. I'm
I'm
happy
just
doing
going
what
to
I'm
do
doing.
this. Yeah. And it seems to be
And I'm
sustaining.
aware of how to
Yeah.
sustain it.
I might need to make tweaks every once in a while. Anyway, well, so
Yeah.
we'll get into when it comes to quitting and what that
Give me the
means.
cliff.
Yeah. So the cliff
Give me the
is
doomiest.
the cliff. It's not Doomiest. It's the pyramid scheme. So the
Oh,
cliff is, it looks like a
it's the
dip,
worst.
but then there's actually no sustainable
Mm-hmm.
group of people.
Yep.
So there's not actually a sustainable market. So like, my wife did a pyramid scheme where she sold like cooking supplies.
Uh-huh.
And we knew it was a pyramid scheme getting into it. We're like, this is a pyramid scheme.
Okay.
And but so
Okay.
you hold some parties, you sell a bunch of cooking
Yep.
supplies, and then it's like, okay, if you want to continue in this, you now have to encourage other people to become the party throwers, and you like get their money, and then they have to encourage people, and then you get both of their monies. It's just a flat out pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so
That sounds right.
she did it because she wanted free cooking equipment, and it sounded great to get for like a great way to get free cooking equipment. But um that's a cliff. A cliff is like there isn't actually a sustainable market here. This isn't something that people will continue to buy. There is a limited number of people who are going to buy this. And then once that number of people runs out, that business is dead, whether you
Mm-hmm.
want it to be or not. Does that make sense? It doesn't matter
Yeah.
what you do. There's only so many people that are going to buy this thing. It actually, he doesn't talk about this, but it reminds me of 23andMe. Did you ever do the 23andMe?
Mm-hmm.
They're actually being sold right now in a kind of a sketchy way where like all the data that we all gave 23andMe is now being like passed on to some dude who's in the company.
Have
But
fun, dude.
there were only so many people who were going to invest in understanding their genealogy. And once
Yeah.
that number of people was reached, that business was done. Does that make sense? Like there was just
Yeah.
it's not something that like people are gonna do routinely or over and over again. You're gonna do it once, and once you've done it, there's X number of people, and then it's over. So that's the cliff. So we got our three: the dip, the cul-de-sac, and the cliff. We got the three. Okay,
Mm-hmm. With the pseudo fourth.
the pseudo fourth. So when it comes to quitting, he says if you're in a cul-de-sac, and I'm going to say if you're in a cul-de-sac and unhappy, let's say that.
Yeah.
Because there's a happy cul-de-sac. If you're in a cul-de-sac and unhappy, which I think is what Godin assumes, is that anybody in a cul-de-sac is unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
If you're
Mm-hmm.
in a cul-de-sac and unhappy, or you realize you're in a cliff, quit immediately.
If you recognize you're in a
If you
multi-level
recognize you're
marketing
in a cliff,
scheme.
quit quit. If you realize like, oh, I'm selling 23andMe and this is not something people to buy more than once and we are running out of customers. He's like, quit doing that thing.
Hmm.
And he said, because in this instance, quitting those things is an act of bravery. It's much
Hmm.
easier to just keep going until it runs out. He's like, so quit because you're wasting time and energy in something that's never actually going to be sustainable. And he's like, average teams, and this is a quote from him, average feels okay, um, but average is for losers. Be the best or quit. That's
Well,
his.
I hate that, but okay.
I think I do also hate it, but I think there's some truth into what he's saying. And I think there's a, and I'll use an example from my own life. I started the right after talking to Mark and Jay, just to continue my like narrative, which I'm sure everybody's heard 1,000 times now, because we're on like episode 252. Who hasn't heard my story already? But so, but I don't have a second story. I have to keep telling the same one. So I went into the write fast, publish, repeat mindset. And I was
Hmm.
like, I'm going to do this thing. And I wrote 3 books pretty fast and I published them one after another. And I got average results and I earned
Hmm.
those average results. I did average things. I earned those average results. I was not the best in the world at writing to market. I did not do what I was supposed to do. So I got average results. There was a moment there. So where I was like, I could continue to do this, be unhappy with my results, but just keep plugging away and live in an unhappy cul-de-sac. And in that instance, I even though I was kind of still plugging along and creating things, I would have been a loser because I wasn't innovating. I wasn't thinking about new tactics. I wasn't trying new things. I was like, I'm just going to keep doing this halfway and doing it halfway. I'm kind of keeping myself happy, but I'm not actually getting the results I want. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
And
Yeah, yeah.
that's what he means by averages for losers. In that instance, if I kept doing what I was doing, I was in the end going to be a loser because I was just going to get more and more bitter about not receiving the results. And I was going to go to office conferences and I was going to be like, this guy's a liar because I do that, even though I don't, and I don't get the results I want to get. And it's not true. So I was going to be that guy. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's not a good guy to be.
No.
So anyway, if you're in a dip, the worst time to quit is when things get hard
Hmm.
because you have sacrificed and not stuck it through to the game. So
Hmm.
he said, if you're in a dip, he's like, and it starts getting hard, don't quit. Keep going. It's like the weird country song. If you're going through hell, just keep going. Don't stop because then you live in hell. So Coden's thing is if you had success up front and you want to and you have dreams of making this of being the best in the world at something, quitting is the worst thing. And he
Hmm.
said quitting in the middle of the dip is about fear. And often it's about fear that you'll never actually master it. And so
Hmm.
you'd rather quit than find out if you're going to master
Yeah.
it. Any thoughts on that?
I think that that's fair. Um, I do think that there are sometimes factors beyond you that you have to consider. Again, this is not only capitalist, but a very Western individualistic mindset, and
Oh, yeah.
sometimes we're not in those situations. So I think that you have to take into consideration what your life is. You can't just be like, well, this is such a financial strain that I'm going to send me, my entire family into extreme debt. I might as well keep pushing through.
Yeah, I got to keep going. I got to keep going. And we do see
No,
movies like that, that like
those are movies.
there is the hero story of like, nobody believed in me. My wife left me, and now I'm a success,
Yeah,
and she can
yeah,
suck it. It's like, no, you probably shouldn't have done that to you. Right?
probably not.
Yeah.
So again, I think that there's some of that in the play, but I think that especially when it comes to writing as a business or writing as a like career that someone wants to pursue, there is a perpetual thing that you need to continuously do. When looking at the cliff, I'm thinking about like the author who publishes one book and does very minute ads for it or anything for it, and then eventually it will reach that cliff point, right? It will fully drop off because there will be no one else that will know about it.
Yeah.
Because if you are only telling people about it on one platform and it's only your friends, you are going to reach a limit and it will cut off eventually.
Yeah.
Um, and so then the question is like when you head that direction and you're not looking for that upward curve, then you're going to hit the cliff. If you're heading in that direction and then you open up another account, if you start ads, if you start something, then you start to move upward on that cliff, on the dip and then upward angle trajectory.
Yeah.
I think
So
too, publishing your next book and etc.
yeah, so you're hitting his uh, how do you live in the dip? You're like getting to
Yeah.
all of his points. So he says successful people hate the dip.
Hmm.
Nobody likes being in the dip, especially
Yeah.
people that succeed. People that don't quit and make it out of the dip, they all hated their time in the dip. So no doctor is like, oh my gosh, the MCAT was amazing. Nobody says that. Everybody hates the hurdles you have to go through to get through the dip. He says, but they realize that like this adversity can be, this period of adversity can be accelerated by trying new tactics.
Yeah.
So he said people who survive the dip and don't quit in the dip have a hunger to get out of the dip. They're like, I have to get out of this. And by to get out of that, they're constantly trying new tactics to be like, hey, I need to, maybe I can market in this way. Let me try. Okay, that didn't work. Let me try this. Maybe that didn't work. And that's what Godin means by if you just keep fighting through the dip, at some point you will find something that works. It may take 20 years, but you will, if you just keep fighting through the dip, at some point you'll get it. So
Yeah.
in author world, it's I find it interesting because it's not advice we give a lot. It is the
Hmm.
advice that Jay Thorne gave me, which because he's also a Godin head, which was, hey, write the next book, market it in a different way. If it doesn't work, write another one. Market
Yeah.
it in a different way. If it doesn't work, write another one. Market it in a different way. At some point, you will find a foothold. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm actually moving forward. And Godin
Yeah.
talks about how everybody is surprised when they come out of the dip because you don't necessarily see it happening in like some people it's a boom where it's like, oh my gosh, this just took off. For most people it's a series of small bursts. It's
Hmm.
like, oh, I got a little burst here, but then some of that burst hangs on. You're like, oh, I got a little burst here. And what you're doing is you're working your way up that bell curve because the
Yeah.
dip is like the climb up the bell curve. It's actually the inverse of, so you're working your way slowly up that bell curve, gaining more and more people that are like, yes, I like this thing. So that finally it starts to gain the attention of the like mass market. Um,
Yeah. I mean, like, an example of my own would be the Mandrake Manor new cover. Like, that is gaining different attention
yep.
that it didn't have before.
New
Is it a
tactic.
lot? No, but it's a boost.
Yeah.
And it's definitely like it's been out for technically 2 years, starting off as a serial,
Hmm.
then moving on to its first iteration with it one cover, and then a year later with a new cover, and it still has life in it.
Yeah. Well, I was just talking to Christine Daigle about your friend and mine, who has a new book coming out
Hmm.
with
Heavy Are the Stones
yeah, Heavy Are the Stones. Everybody should go check it out.
with
I was
J.D.
just talking
Barker.
with her about Michael Crichton, the king
Hmm.
of um, science fiction thrillers and or science. I don't know. They're fiction, science fiction thrillers. They're science-y thrillers. I don't even know how to describe them. But he, kind of defined a genre. But the book that took off was his seventh book,
Hmm.
not his first one. It was his, he wrote six books that were like not, didn't really go anywhere. He called them his couch and out to dinner books because he earned
Yeah.
enough money to buy a couch or to go out to dinner.
Yep.
That's what happened. And then finally he hits a book that takes off, but he's got years and years where it's just, or Godin talks about in the dip in traditional publishing, he talks about you hear these stories of people who have to query 100 agents before they sell their first book. And
Hmm.
he's like, that is somebody fighting through the dip. They
Yep.
are trying new tactics, learning new things. This didn't work. I'm just fighting through the hurdles. I'm mastering query letters, which has nothing to do with whether or not my book is good, but it's just a hurdle that we've set up. So I'm going to master this hurdle, and maybe that'll get me to the next stage of this thing. And so I think, yeah, before I like close us on this, any other thoughts on the dip?
I don't think so. I think that if you aren't someone who is super productivity mindset, but you're someone who is maybe like us who want to make this a living, where at least for me, I would love to just reach an average and I would like to stay at, a certain number that moves up. But at the moment, I am aware that I have to keep moving up towards that and that there are going to be constant dips that I have to get over and I have to keep moving. But by no means am I intending to be someone who exponentially explodes because I just don't think that that's
Yeah, no,
I think that that's a bigger risk for me than just finding a happy average that I want to stay at.
yeah, I would say though, I think what you're calling a happy average is actually what you're describing sustainable growth.
Yeah.
Not, you don't need to have a viral sensation,
Yeah.
but you're describing what I would say good would put in a dip of sustainable growth. It doesn't need to take off on the other end of the U, but you would like for it to continue to grow slowly for the rest of
Yeah.
your adulthood. Yeah. I
For
think,
perpetuity.
yeah, I have the same kind of desires and goals. I really, I think I've mentioned, I forget what I talk about here and what I talk about on bonus episodes, but when I was, when I do a lot of like studying of film directors, and when I did David Fincher, there's a quote that stuck with me. Somebody was trying well, they were talking to Mark Ruffalo, and they're like, why does David Fincher do a million takes of a scene? Why
Hmm.
is he obsessive over that? And Mark Ruffalo said, oh, he's striving for immortality. There is definitely something in me. I heard that quote and I was like, yeah, that's what, I don't know why, but there's something in me that's like, no, I want to create things that people have to reckon with for a long time. Um, Not necessarily
I want to wreck people.
in more my Loki way, not necessarily in my like, I want to help the world way, in more my Loki way of like,
Hmm.
no, no, no. I want to make things that like really make people have to question their reality. So
Great. Cool, cool, cool.
yeah, aren't
Love
you
that.
glad you're in this with me? So anyway, but I'm like you, I don't need a viral sensation. I'm okay
Hmm.
to like fight my way through this for the next, 30 years. I'm great with that. But I do think, and so just kind of summing this up, if you have dreams like you and I do, if you're an author listening to this, you're like, yes, I would also like a sustained career. A viral hit is a way to get that, but to get the viral hit, you have to fight through the dip. To get the sustainable growth, you have to fight through the dip. So what Godin says is, if you're nervous about this and you're experiencing a lot of anxiety around when will I have mastery, he said, go ahead and set up your quick critiques right now. If things drop to this level, if things get this bad, I'm out.
Hmm.
He says because the sunk cost fallacy of I've already put this much into this, so I have to keep going. He's like, that's a terrible attitude to have. This is time and
Hmm.
energy you could put into something else in your life that's going to make you happy. So just go ahead and set up your quick criteria. Just go ahead and say, like, if I have a month where I sell X number, this few books, I'm done. If I have a month where I don't write for 4 weeks, I'm done. I'm giving this up. Godin's like, that's going to make you happier because you have this moment where you're not constant. The worst thing you can do is live in the dip, in the hard part of the dip, and continuously question whether or not you should keep going.
Yeah.
He says, so just go ahead and set up. This is when
Yeah.
I quit. Now, what I've found with people who take the dip seriously and actually try to do that is they find, well, there's not anything that can actually make me quit this.
Right.
It doesn't matter how bad it gets. I'm going to keep going. And that's kind of Godin's point, is that if you're going to be the best in the world, you have to have that attitude. It doesn't matter how bad it gets. I'm just going to keep fighting through.
Yeah.
So when we're going to these conferences, if you fall into that category of author like I'm describing, when we're going to these conferences, understand that you're hearing people's tactics and that those tactics are not necessarily going to be salvific in that, like, oh, if I apply this system, I will be amazing. But they're also not bad to try
Hmm.
because you have to constantly be trying new tactics anyway. So Godin says, like, get excited about trying new things. Don't think of it as a burden. Think of it as a, maybe this will escalate my time in the tip. Maybe this
Right.
will get me out of this faster. And
Right.
knowing that, like, it's not a permanent solution, you're going to have to constantly be trying new tactics, but this is just a new thing you can try. And so he's like, flip your mindset and start getting excited about, like, if somebody's like, well, I did book talk and I sold this many things. I know my inherent 90-year-old inner self is like, God damn it, another technology I have to
Guess
master.
I gotta get out of TikTok.
Yeah, Godin's like, don't do that because that's a failure mindset. Instead, be like, hey, this happened. This is exciting. This is a new tactic I could try. This
Yeah.
is like
Yeah.
something, and maybe if it works, it'll get me out of the dip faster. If it doesn't work, no big deal. I'm in the dip anyway. So, like, I just got to
Yep.
keep finding new things to try. So that's now going back to our happy cul-de-sac. We have a lot of writers who are like, I'm not looking for a career. I have one or two dream books that I like to write.
Yeah.
And I think that's beautiful and great, and that's a wonderful, like, thing to do. Write the beautiful book of your heart, share it with the world. I think where that dream starts to get convoluted is when you go to a conference and you have the, like, one beautiful book you have to write, and then somebody says to you, but to sell that book you have to write to market, so you need to go change that book to write to market. If you're not looking for a sustainable career, that's not a tactic that's going to help you write your one or
Yeah.
two beautiful books. Does
Yep.
that make sense?
Yep.
So, like,
100%.
but I think we listen to people speak with confidence and go, oh my gosh, I have to do what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many authors I talk to who are super discouraged because they're like, well, I just wanted to write my one beautiful book and I have this amazing book in my mind, but I was told I have to write to market to genre tropes. So
Hmm.
I'm rearranging the beautiful story I want to write to make it match romance tropes.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
always tell them, I'm like, are you looking to have a sustainable career as a romance writer?
Right.
And they're always like, no, I just really want to write this one. But I'm like, well, then stop what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stop it.
I
Stop
mean,
what you're doing.
like the big thing is, unfortunately, we live in a capitalist society. A
Yeah.
lot of the books that were written for people to, especially indie authors, to understand how processes work, and indie authors have to do the marketing as well. And so a lot of the speakers are people who are doing this as a business. They are then going to promote the productivity mindset. They're going to promote the palatable mindset. They're going to promote the have the book that looks and feels the same as the book that the person just read. And that does not apply to every person that's at those conferences.
Yeah.
Some people that are at those conferences are looking to learn craft and they're looking to learn how to write a good story. And that does not mean write to market. That is
Yeah.
just a facet for some people.
Yeah. And I think there's part of the reason I wanted to do this book today is because I think we get easily discouraged when we hear speakers say it has to be this way.
Yeah.
And it never has to be. That is never true. It's never true that it has to be a certain way. That is, what I wish speakers would say, although this does not get butts in seats. What gets butts in seats is a speaker saying, "I have a magic bullet."
Hmm.
What doesn't get butts in seats is, "I have this one thing that worked for me in this one way in the appropriate market conditions that might be a tactic you could try if you also wanted the same type of success that I'm having."
Yeah.
That doesn't get anybody to come and sit in their conference.
No.
One, it's too big to put it into a title. But two, it's not what we want. We want the magic bullet. So, I don't blame anybody for selling magic bullets, but I do, just as we go into talks and conferences, and as we like listen to the Allied 24-hour conference that's coming up, or we go to Author Nation, or we go to our local thing like I'm doing this weekend, I think it's just important to go in with an understanding of what you're after, and
Yep.
don't be discouraged by tactics. Godin's other advice that we didn't talk about, which we should hit real quick, is often when you're in the dip, a great way to escalate, to shorten your time there, to escalate the like growth, is to pick a smaller niche. He's like, if you need to be the best in the world at something, you're like, I'm going to be the best real estate agent in the state of Maryland. He's like, maybe instead try to be the best real estate agent in southwestern Maryland. He's
Yeah.
like, because you're going to find more tactics that apply to that smaller niche than the larger niche. The tactics get fuzzier and fuzzier. The
Yeah.
larger the audience you're going for, the harder it becomes to determine what tactics are working and what aren't, because your sample size is too big. He's like, so niche down. He's
Yep.
like, and then after you conquered a niche, you can then become the master of all of Maryland, like if you want to. But anyway,
Calm down.
yeah, that's other advice from him that I thought was good. Um,
Yeah.
any final thoughts on the dip?
No, I don't think so. I
Okay.
think, yeah, I think we're good.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're good too. We did it. We
We
finished the
did
time.
it.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, JP.
Yeah.
Thanks for tolerating my doom and gloom.
Well, that's what I'm here for.
That evidently is your lot in life. Um, because Jeff just keeps showing up. I'm like Jack Black in High Fidelity. You hired me for 2 days a week, and I just keep coming in every day. Um,
There you are.
all right, I'm gonna turn off the recording. We can talk a little bit more.